Hello again, and this is the podcast Paranormal Family Therapy, and I am the host, Dr. Darren Wallace. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, a clinical social worker, and a certified addictions counselor. And I've been working with families since 1996, and I have been working with families dealing with paranormal phenomena in family therapy since 2002, so about 20 years. Paranormal Family Therapy is a podcast that talks about paranormal phenomena and how the psychotherapeutic community interacts with the paranormal, with family therapy in particular. Now, today, we are very fortunate to have Dave Barnett here with us. Dave is an energy medicine practitioner, healer, and intuitive with over 35 years of experience in Colorado. He has multiple technical degrees and is truly and literally a rocket scientist. In the early 1980s, Dave had some turning points in his life, and this led to a passion in discovering and developing his gifts in multiple forms of energy healing. He embarked on a path of training in many modalities and developing a conceptual understanding of how the different systems work, complement each other, and support spirituality. Dave has gifts in healing, reading the Akashic records, energy and entity clearing, changing core beliefs, karma burning, and discerning spiritual gifts. Dave continually seeks out new modalities, learns and experiences from their practitioners, and frequently highlights these on his weekly web radio show. Dave is a strong believer in health issues, having many potential causes in different energy planes. Dave works with many spiritual guides and communicates with them freely. So, welcome to Paranormal Family Therapy, Dave. I'm very happy to have you here today. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me. This will be fun.
Yeah, this should be. And so I'm excited to hear about, some of your stories. Now, when I first heard about you, I heard about you in sort of the vein of, I know you don't call yourself this, but it was sort of like you're a medium, but at the same time, a rocket scientist. And I thought, oh, I have got to interview this guy if he's able to do both of those things. And so, Dave, you've been a scientist by education and training, as well as some other interesting training opportunities. So please share with us the scientific background that you have.
Sure. I discovered electronics in fifth grade,
Uh-huh.
and it became a compulsion. I had to find out how circuits worked, why you hooked up resistors and capacitors and various ways to do things. And I started taking apart TVs to harvest parts. I started fixing electronics for neighbors. I started building purchase kits for shortwave radios, and then I became a ham radio operator in junior high. So I was talking to people around the world, and that just was clearly my career track. I wanted to become an electrical engineer. I grew up in Wichita. I ended up going to college at Kansas State University. I got my bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. I went to University of Michigan in Ann Arbor and got my master's in electrical engineering, and it focused on bioelectrical sciences because I decided I really wanted to be a bioengineer. When I graduated, I couldn't find any jobs in it. And so I ended up going and working at General Motors, which was nearby, at their proving grounds, which is where they test cars. And I designed in-house test instruments that would go on cars for say Chevrolet wanted to measure something to do with shock absorbers. We might make a custom data gathering box, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
After a couple of years, I got tired of Michigan. I got tired of General Motors and decided I wanted to get out of there. And I moved back to Wichita with my wife. And I went to work for Boeing. And so I got the totally opposite end of the spectrum in terms of engineering control. In aerospace, everything is controlled by drawings, by engineering practices, things like that. And so it was a good experience. And I worked on automated test sets that supported the cruise missile program. And after a couple of years there, they started talking about moving a lot of their operations down to Huntsville, Alabama. And Huntsville was not in the cards for me. I had no interest. Martin Marietta came through town, and this was 1981, and they were hiring, and I got a plant trip and came out to Denver, and I loved Denver. And I said, man, I'd do anything to live here in Denver. And they offered me a job, and I started in June of 81. During my tenure at Martin, which eventually merged with Lockheed, so it became Lockheed Martin, I worked on a variety of rocket programs, worked on missiles, worked on satellites. And my final 7 or 8 years were working in a R&D area. And I developed a lot of tools to use with microsatellites. And I ended up with about 7 patents in that area. I'm always a believer in education. I always have to know more and more. And so along the way, I also got Martin Marietta to pay for me to get a degree in psychology. And then down the road from that, I got a master's in computer science. And so I ended up with 4 degrees, and I have my professional engineering license in the state of Colorado that's still active.
Okay. Well, you did mention in the intro that you had some certain turning points in your life in the early 1980s that I think you're saying sort of pointed you towards the spiritual realm. So please help us to understand what that means.
In the time frame around 1982, 83, I'm doing intense analytical work out at Martin. I'm analyzing circuits that go into rocketry, and I'm up there on the blackboard against PhD consultants for other companies, arguing whether or not a circuit will work in all circumstances, things like that. So I was really intensely involved in that. But I started finding that a lot of the things that we learned in engineering were just flat wrong. They were simplifications that made it easy to analyze stuff. And for 99.9% of the world, that was sufficient to build circuits that worked, that did their function. But it didn't get to the core. An example I use is engineers frequently use a formula called Ohm's law, where volts equals current in amps times the resistance in ohms. And if you can measure that to 10 digits after the decimal point, it's accurate. It never fails. It's one of the most reliable formulas in mankind's history, frankly. But when you boil it down, it doesn't tell you what an electron is. And that's what I was missing. I was missing what is our reality, what is going on. And so I was kind of primed in certain ways to be open to new ways at looking at things. And so in the summer of 83, I went back to my 10th high school reunion in Wichita, and I ran into an old friend, Barry, and Barry said, "Dave, did you become an electrical engineer like you expected?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Do you think it's possible to change things at a distance?" I said, what do you mean by that? And he asked it a couple different ways. And he finally said, "I want to show you some things at my house. Let's go over there after the picnic." And so we hop in his car after the lunch and go over to his house. And the first thing we do, we get out of the car and we walk over to the electric meter on the side of his house. And he looks at it and he said, "Do you see how fast the wheel is spinning in there?" I said, "Sure." And for listeners, the rate of the spin of that wheel is proportional to the amount of power you're using at that moment in time in your house. I said, "Sure, I can see it." And he points at it with his finger and he goes, "Now," and it slows by a third. And then he tells me, I did this to my mother's house several months ago and her bills are still lower.
Oh, wow.
Okay, so more to come. We go inside and he has a little black and white TV, a cheapie with rabbit ears. And Wichita only had 4 channels at the time that were broadcast. And he puts it on a snow channel and he points it to TV and he goes, "Now," and he tunes in a station. It's like, wow, this is getting intriguing. I'm starting to feel the hair come up on the back of my neck a little bit. And being his job at that time was an FM disc jockey, he had a very nice stereo. And we walk over to the stereo and he has music going. And he said, "Do you see how the needles are moving with the music? They have those VU needles and if the right channel gets louder, the needle goes up. You can see it directly. I said,
Mhm.
sure. And he goes, now, and the needles go out of phase with the music. So when the music gets louder, the needles go down instead of up. Wow, okay, this is getting really intriguing.
Yeah, sure it was.
And he said, well, let's go out to the car again. So we go out and we sit in his car, and it's conventional ignition, and he starts it and it's idling, takes his hand and feet off of everything and goes, now. And the idle slows down to the point where it's stalling. And he said, I can stall other cars in traffic. It's
Wow.
like, wow, wouldn't we all like that? Especially on I-25 here. you know, I'm sorry, you're go stalling, you're going to go to the side of the road. And the final thing that day that he showed me, we went down to his radio station. It's a 50,000 watt FM station. And we went into the back room where they have the meters to give the status of the transmitter, because they have to track that. And one of them is a digital panel meter, and it's reading 99.6, which means 99.6% of that 50,000 watts is going out the antenna right then. And it was rock solid, it's stable. And he said, you see that meter? And he explained it. And I said, sure. And he said, it's stable, right? And I said, yeah. And he goes, I'm going to lower that. And he said, I can't lower it very much or I'll trip the station off the air. And I've done that already. But he said, I'm going to lower it a little bit. So you ready? I said, sure. And he goes, now. And it drops to 99.2.
Hmm.
Well, that's 0.4% of 50,000 watts plus the overhead power in the transmitter it takes to create that 50,000 watts to go out the antenna. He did it when he intended to, in the direction he intended to, and at such a large scale. And I can't recall reading about other people who have psychokinesis being able to do things like this, where it happens every time, it happens in the right direction, and it happens at that scale. Yeah, a lot of them do little tiny things, but they don't do big things. I just said, I've got to find out what's going on here. I felt like the big hands of God had come down around me and said, I'm going to give you a demonstration in your area of specialty that you can't ignore and you can't explain away. Because I knew from what he had done that he wasn't faking it. There was just no way. And, so I was a good technical critic on that. Plus, I was one of only about 10 people that he ever showed this to. He
Uh-huh.
had no intention of ever publicizing or profiting from it. And so I came back to Denver and I got involved in taking psychic development classes at some of the bookstores. And I was blessed where I met 3 women who we were all very compatible. And so every 2 weeks we met in the evening to try different things for about 2 years.
Hmm.
I started taking all the therapeutic touch healing lessons that I could, and got all their credentials.
Hmm.
I even had a teacher who went outside their curriculum and did things. I'm an engineer. I love evidence. I love to see proof that things are working. And
Hmm.
so in those healing classes one time, well, in fact, 2 times, the teacher brought in test cases for that were blind to us. So she brought in a woman in her 50s, a little heavy set, and she said she has a diagnosed condition. I want you guys to figure out what it is. And as soon as she walked through the door, I knew it was abdominal. And then when she was on a massage table and I was scanning her um, with my hand to figure out what was going to energetically, I got this is in her colon. Not only that, it's in her transverse colon. She has a problem there. She has something very wrong. And everybody did their thing. And then she had a woman explain what was going on. And the woman had a diagnosis of a colonic problem, and it was in her transverse colon. We didn't have the terms back then of like IBC, or IBS, irritable bowel, or Crohn's, but it's obviously she has something like that. And that really instilled confidence. I had another event there where my usual practice partner, I went to one of these classes, and this was up in Evergreen, and I was feeling kind of sick, a little bit fluey, but I went anyway. And she saw me, and I just kind of coasted through the class. And then I drove home. And while I was driving home, it was about a 40-minute drive. all of a sudden I started feeling warmth coming over me, just rolling warmth and everything. I thought, that's remarkable. And I went to the next class and I asked this young lady, I said, did you do some remote healing on me when I left class last week? And she kind of put her eyes down a little bit. She goes, yeah, I did. And once again, I wasn't expecting it. So it was a great validation that this stuff works and it's present.
Mm-hmm.
Another area that I got involved with was a group that was working with channeling ascended masters. Ascended masters are typically Tibetan, but we even have ascended masters in the Old Testament
Mm-hmm.
of the Bible, such as Ezekiel and Noah and Elijah the prophet. He ascended and dropped his scarf to Elisha on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So we have ascended masters there, and so I learned how to do channeling then, and so I kept using all these gifts, starting to get clients on the side, and I never mixed the aerospace with the healing because I just knew that I couldn't hang out a shingle that says, Dave the healer, in an aerospace setting. So I always kept those worlds very separate.
Well, that's interesting that you had to do that. I know that's somewhat similar to some of the previous guests that we've had on the show, where they're mediums and they're also psychotherapists. Their family is that there's this separation between the two, and then how to blend the two, and what that looks like. And so I can appreciate the sort of the grappling of this. You have to grapple with both of those ideas that are very different, but that's partially why I wanted you to come onto the podcast, so that we could hear somebody who truly has very different ends of a spectrum in terms of thinking and feeling and interacting with other people. And so that's why I wanted to have you on. So that's a great story. Now, you also, you did say you do some cleansing.
Yes.
And please help us to understand what that means, and what does that look like for you? What do you do? How does that work?
Well, in the time period when I was doing the R&D work, when I left that renewable energy company in 2003, a voice in my head said, you have all the time you need, all the money you need, go learn everything you can about healing. And so since it was a consulting job and I was on my own on what hours I worked, I was able to take lots of classes. And so I learned about 8 or 9 different healing modalities. I did 2 years of classes in psychic mentoring from a Denver medium.
Mm-hmm.
And I even went to acupuncture school for a couple terms, but decided it wasn't for me. But it did give me a grounding in Chinese medicine and herbology. So that was very helpful. A lot of gifts really started showing up with that, and a lot of different experiences. I mean, one that was very strange and sounds very odd, but I'll try to walk you through it. In a meditation, I was taken by spiritual guides to the courtyard of what looked like a castle, and they opened up a trap door, and we went down these dark, gloomy steps into what looked like some type of dungeon, and walked down the hallway into the dungeon, hit a great big heavy door that had the iron on it, and they said, go ahead and open it. And I opened it, and there was a person in there on some type of torture device. They're on a rack or something being tortured by several demons around them. I said, okay, what am I supposed to learn from this? And they said, well, this person is in their own self-created hell. They are there because when they died, they thought they belonged in hell, and they had a vision of what hell looks like. And creation just says, yes. So they said, from our point of view, there is no objective hell that people go to. When people go to hell, it's always self-created. It's always subjective. And they said, I said, well, what's the long-term prospect for this person? They said, at some point, 200, 300, 400 years of your time, they finally sort of just kind of get bored and say, is this it? Mm-hmm. And angels step in and say, well, do you want to go to the spiritual plane now? Because you've always had the capability. It's almost like Dorothy tapping her shoes together, saying there's no place like home.
She always had that ability, but
She always
she
had that ability.
had to, yeah.
So they said, we want you to develop um, a protocol for getting these people back to the spiritual plane quickly.
Uh-huh.
And so what I did was, well, I'm pragmatic. So I kind of snapped my fingers, had the person stand up, get off the equipment, uh, be immediately cleaned, showered, put in a fresh robe. And then I created a door there, and we walked through the door into something that looked like a conference room. I had them sit on one side of the conference table, and I sat with the guides on the other. And we very patiently explained to them what they'd done with their experience. And then I said, I want to prove to you that hell is an illusion. And so I created a torch and a sconce on the wall, had them take the torch, open the door and look out there. And now it's just a black void. There's nothing there where they would have expected to see the room that they'd come from.
Mm-hmm.
So then they were open to being escorted back to the spiritual plane. So we had them escorted. And then I took them through sort of a brief ritual there to reacquaint them with friends and family, and even the people who they'd either hurt or who had hurt them, and to go through a reconciliation so that they could get back on track in the spiritual plane to get back on their spiritual path. And so I started doing this onesie twosie, then I started doing it bigger groups, and then I started developing a protocol to go after the people who, through church training where they believe that there's something called limbo or purgatory, and they're kind of trapped there, to recover those people and get those people back to spiritual plane. Mm-hmm. So this has given me a lot of experience on different layers of vibration, things that are not just, we're here in our 3D reality, or else we're in the spiritual plane, but also in the astral plane and lower dark planes, and where the demons come from and things like this. So good experience.
Wow. That is interesting. Oh, when
go ahead.
Go ahead. I was going to say, when you do these clearings, how do you prepare yourself? What's that process like for you when you're preparing to help a family or whoever you're assisting? What is it that you do to prepare yourself?
Well, let me talk a little bit more about when I had my first clearing,
okay,
because I think this was a gift handed to me. So it's around 2008. My wife and I were in Las Vegas, and I get a phone call while I'm walking down one of the casino shopping areas, and a woman says, I hope you can help me. I'm a friend of your daughter's, and my daughter has a master's in counseling and psychology. She works in nursing homes. And this lady said, I have phenomena going on in my house, and I don't know what to do. I'm married to my second husband, and both he and my 16-year-old stepdaughter are extremely skeptical about this, so I can't talk to them about it. And she said, we have 2 little kids, and something walks up behind me and says my name. When I'm laying in bed, it presses on the covers. My 2 little ones see witches flying out of closets. And she said, we got a great deal on the house. Nobody would tell us why. And then when we moved in, the neighbors told us that the previous owner was an older man who was a recluse, and he had hanged himself in the basement. And she said, I hope you can do something. So, okay, well, I'm game. I'll try anything new. And so I worked on it, viewing this remotely and seeing what was going on. And I found a guy wandering around the house, and I did what I thought I needed to move him on, and check some other things. And then when I talked to her about a week later, she said, yeah, things are good. And then she called me another week later and said, some of it's happening again. I thought, well, okay, I need to take another view. And I thought, what if this guy who hanged himself, who put himself in one of his own subjective hells, and was somehow still connected to the house? And sure enough, I found him in a hell. I got him out of there, got him to the spiritual plane, and got him totally disconnected from the house. Talked to her again, and all the phenomena had stopped. And I thought, wow, this is straightforward. So a couple key guidelines for this is, for my purposes, when I do clearings, I always do them remotely. I've had two unfortunate experiences where people absolutely insisted I go to their house, and I found that the problems they were having had a lot to do with their personalities, um, and their compulsion that I had to be at their house in order to make the clearing work. It just caused problems, and so um, I just have a criteria that I don't go to the house. I tell people that when I do it this way, the entities don't know that I'm coming, so they don't have a chance to either prepare or hide, and they don't have a chance to try to latch on to me and stick on me, as part of the process.
Yeah.
So I've done probably several thousand clearings since then, and that's always been my sort of guiding principle on this. So we'll get back to your question about what do I do to prepare. My clearing process takes place over 3 phone calls, and the first phone call we fill out a spreadsheet that I have that your listeners can see on my website if they choose at davethemystic.com. So I have a spreadsheet there where I cover everybody, the vehicles, the pets, and the house and the property and any outbuildings against a whole bunch of categories of different types of entities. So in the first phone call, I explain those categories as we fill out the chart. Between the first and second phone call, I usually allow about a week, and in that time period, I do the clearing. Um, the way I do the clearing is in the spiritual plane. There's a very large pyramid that they've created for me for healing, and under the sloping side on one side, I have a whole bunch of compartments that sort of look like disc jockey soundproof booths. And when I'm actually doing the clearing, I visualize that each person or each thing I'm going to clear goes into one of those booths. The spiritual beings who work with me, archangels, angels, others, are inside the booth with the person or the house or whatever, while I stand outside. And so it gives me a degree of safety. And I have a lot of other safeguards I use for myself too. So I don't pick up stuff from other people. But the entities that come out of that person that we've determined by that spreadsheet, we bring them out sequentially, and then I deal with each one in turn using my tools on getting them to, in the case of earthbound spirits, they just need to go to the spiritual plane. And no ifs, ands, or buts. It's time to go. And I'm not like some other mediums who negotiate with them or try to find out who would make it comfortable for them to go. I view people who are earthbound as there's something very wrong in their psychology and their understanding of life. To me, it's there's no legitimate reason for them to be in the astral plane hanging around us. When people die and they don't go to the spiritual plane, they have something wrong in their understanding. They may not understand that there's life after death, and they're like Bruce Willis in the movie Sixth Sense. They wander around saying, "Why won't anybody talk to me?" Some of them may have been addicted to something, and they have this crazy notion that if they go to the spiritual plane, they will still have their cravings and they won't be able to satisfy them there, and they'll be in a perpetual torment. So they stay here so they can latch on to people's energies who might do the same vice that they had. You find a lot of earthbounds hanging around bars because they were alcoholics and they're looking to attach to somebody who is a drinker, and hopefully get them to drink more and more. They enjoy it vicariously through them. Another group that I find are those that have just a little smattering of Christian faith, and they believe that they're sinners, and if they go to the spiritual plane, they're going to be turned away at those pearly gates and sent to an eternal hell, and they're not willing to take the chance.
Yeah.
Occasionally you find some who have unfinished business where the old man died and unexpectedly, and he's just got to tell his wife, he's got to get the message to her that the cash is hidden in the coffee can in the sofa. Don't get rid of the sofa. Only he doesn't realize that it's 2022 and he did this in 1931, and everybody's dead and gone. He has no comprehension of the passage of time. So he's trying to find that mediumistic person who can get the message to his wife to not lose the money.
Uh-huh.
So you get some like that. But all of these show a great misunderstanding of what happens to us normally when we go to the spiritual plane, which is we get escorted, we go through the light, um, we get sort of an update in terms of what people call a life review, where uh, you can either do it quickly or spread out over time to just see how you did, sort of on your life goals that you set out when you took on the incarnation. And
Mm.
then you integrate into the society there and enjoy it and learn and take classes and have hobbies and all kinds of wonderful things. But many people don't have even a concept of that. And to a certain degree, if you die without a concept of any concept of what heaven looks like, um, you're still creating your reality. And so you may be creating essentially a void space where you're just kind of in a waiting room.
Mm.
You're sitting there in a chair. You're kind of like Beetlejuice at the end when he's sitting there waiting for his number to be called.
Mhm.
You don't know what else to do. And so, yeah, sort of a long way of saying that for people who are earthbound, I really don't see a benefit of negotiating with them to say, what grandmother has to come here to escort you little 9-year-old girl who fell down the steps to get her back to heaven. I just move them.
Yeah, you just move them along. So just so that I know, I'm curious about this. Is you do these remote clearings and cleansings? How do you do that?
I've always done a lot of my healing remote, and especially with the pandemic now, 99% of my clients are remote. So I do remote healing for people all over the world. So to me, distance doesn't make a difference.
Uh-huh.
We can connect energetically just fine, and the physical part doesn't matter. It kind of gets back to, people think about, well, heaven is up there as if it's separated by physical distance. No, heaven may just be slightly turning the tuning knob on the radio, and you go from 98 FM to 101 FM, and the radio waves are all still in the same place. So
Mm. So, Dave, what I think I'm hearing you say is you just need a location, and that's about it, and then you'll be able to connect with this regardless of where it's at.
yeah, and I've even got to the point that when somebody gives me their address for the house on my form, I just put the house number on it. I don't even put the street address or the
Yeah.
city. That's enough for me to hook into the house and link to it to do the work. So
Oh, okay, great. Now, do you do some collaboration with paranormal investigators, clergy, folks like that, in the
I
work that
I, I get called in occasionally. I do work with people. I get a lot of people referred to me by other intuitives, mediums and others who say, yes, I'm a medium. Yes, I know there's something around this person, but I'm not equipped to deal with it.
uh-huh.
So I sent them to you so you can move these things on and get them clear. And so I get a lot more collaboration that way, where people just say, in my intuitive toolbox, this isn't one of my tools to remove these entities. I don't feel comfortable doing it.
Hmm.
And so I get a lot of clients through referrals like that.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. I One of the things that I appreciate is this collaboration between different professionals. You
Hmm.
have clergy, you have mediums, you have paranormal investigators. Now, my part of that is that I'm a family therapist, so I do the family therapy end of this,
Hmm.
where I help the family resolve conflict, get along better, do whatever they need to do to be on the same team, unite them,
Yeah.
so that when they do ask or force out one of these entities, or in your case, I guess they would be moved on,
Hmm.
that the family isn't doing things to invite them back,
Yeah.
so that they are actually getting along better for the long haul, not just
Hmm.
in the moment to get them out, and a united front as a team, just to get them out, but to keep them out as well. So
Yeah.
I'm curious if you have any advice for folks like me, the ones that work with the families, in therapy, is there any way for me to help, families to be able to be prepared for the work that you're doing?
Yeah. Well, one of the things I didn't mention is in my second clearing phone call, after I discussed the results of the clearing, I provide tools for how
Hmm.
people can keep their house protected and also protect themselves personally.
Yeah.
And so on the property, when I clear the house, I energetically create a box around the whole property. It looks like a crystalline box.
Hmm.
That's to contain the entities so they can't escape when I'm doing the clearing. And then when I'm done, I leave that box in place and I put mirroring on the outside. So it's like a one-way mirror. I found that dark entities do not like to approach mirrors, whether they're physical or energetic. Apparently, they don't want to see the truth about themselves.
Hmm.
And so I leave that box in place, and then I ask the client once a month, do a brief meditation for a minute or two where they just see that box and put some conscious energy into it so that it doesn't fade away. Um, so that's for that. And then for the personal protection, I talk about, I have a tool, I just call it the disco ball. And I have people visualize that each morning for about a week when they first get out of bed, they see themselves stepping into a disco ball that's big enough for them to be inside. Again, it has mirrors on the outside. And then I suggest that they visualize in the gaps between the mirrors, white light, and that could be white light of the creator or white light of the universe. And then also a sacred flame, and that could be a blue flame of Archangel Michael. And those three together around people seem to be very effective at repelling entities, repelling curses, repelling energy cords trying to attach, all these different types of things. But the other things that I would say that might be valuable for you is there's an awful lot of black magic being done out there.
Hmm.
And whereas you might think, well, the black magic, if they do it, it's going to be like curses. And like, well, no, a lot of times they are sending entities to bother you.
Yeah.
And so as part of my clearings now, I check for black magic being sent. And if it's being sent, I shut down what they're sending. And I also work with spiritual beings to turn off the tools or the gifts that the people have who are sending the black magic. There's a lot of people dabbling in it, and to me, it's a very slippery slope to getting in over their heads over time with something that they can't back out of because now they've crossed the line in some way, and they could even be blackmailed or punished if they try to escape the system.
Yeah.
So I see that. The other thing is a lot of people are coming into their gifts now, but I think you need to be careful that you don't accidentally open the door for entities to try to control you by sitting down there and closing your eyes and saying, I'm going to use my gift of this or my gift of that. So I always talk to clients, it's okay if you do this, but here are two warm-up statements to set boundaries. And the first one is, I only connect with the spiritual plane or higher. And the second one is, I only communicate with high vibrational beings. Uh, Both of those really set up boundaries or barriers from connecting to things out of the astral plane that might be very unpleasant or very confusing, or they tell the truth to con you and bring you in, and then they start giving you the lies.
Yeah.
So it helps with keeping those things from bothering you when you do this. That's one of the traditional problems with a Ouija board for kids messing around with them is they basically just say, we want to talk to anything that's out there. And by golly, there is a lot of stuff out there. And you
Yeah,
just
there's a
ask
lot.
them into your house.
Yeah.
And they can be very, very negative and untrustworthy over time and very unpleasant experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. It happens a number of clients that I've had. That's what started all of their problems was they
Mm-hmm.
were, messing with a Ouija board, even if it was messing with it years ago. And
Yeah.
some of the problems that, last for years or even decades afterwards.
The other thing I found is anything that lowers consciousness makes you more susceptible to entities getting into your field.
Hmm.
Whether it's drinking, whether it's recreational drugs, whether it's medical marijuana, or even anesthesiology, being used in a hospital. Um, I have a lot of clients, they all know my standard speech is, if you're going in for surgery, let me know so I can put up protections around you for both your room and also the operating room. Because when you're under anesthesia, um, there are entities walking around hospitals. I mean, a lot of people die in hospitals, let's be frank. And a lot of those become earthbound spirits, and they're wandering around and they find somebody who's under the effects of anesthesia, and they may be much more susceptible to getting in their field and attaching to them.
Wow.
Uh,
Okay.
so I do that routinely for my clients.
Hmm. That's good information. Thank you. I'm going to be thinking about what you just said for quite a while after this. Well, Dave, is there anything that you would like to be able to communicate here in our last few minutes that you think is important about your work, or things that you would want folks to know that are listening to this podcast?
Yeah, it's number one is most of the stuff we're talking about. Uh, it can be frightening if it gets to be bad, but in terms of physical effects, physical damage, physical harm, that's very, very, very rare. It's these entities want to put fear into you because they feed off of fear. If anybody out there saw the cartoon Monsters Inc., where they went out and the monsters would go hide in little kids' closets and get them to scream, and they stored up the scream energy. That's what these dark entities want. They want you to be angry. They want you to be fearful. If you can develop a level of detachment, just say, what, this nonsense again? They wear out their welcome. They'll go find more fertile ground. It's like, you're no fun to play with anymore,
Hmm.
because they are not getting emotional energy out of you by doing this stuff. So it's very rare that you find something where you actually have physical effects that are a threat. I mean, certainly when you do, you want to get those tackled as quick as possible, but
Sure.
that's very rare. The other thing is, I think we're coming into a glorious age of spiritual development, and a lot of people's gifts are going to be getting turned on. I find many people, their clairaudient gifts are being turned on, where they do hear voices.
Uh,
And once again, I would just say, yes, listen to those voices, but go back to those two statements that I had for setting boundaries, so
yes.
that when you do hear these voices, that you're assured that they come from a spiritual source and they aren't coming from something dark just because your antenna is going up and you're starting to hear these.
Hmm.
But we're coming up to some major spiritual transitions, great opportunities to really zoom, and a lot of people are being turned on. And so you just have to respect the gift and use it appropriately. But there's great opportunities coming for everybody.
Wow, that's important information. And I really appreciate what you've said here today, Dave. So thank you, Dave, for being with us today. Dave Barnett, appreciate your time and all of the wonderful information that you provided in the short time that we had with you. And thank you all for listening today. This has been Paranormal Family Therapy, and I'm your host, Dr. Darren Wallace. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.